A poor girl spent her last coins to pay a stranger's bus fare. She never imagined he was a millionaire, and what he did next shocked everyone. Welcome to today's video, an emotional and suspense-filled story of kindness, sacrifice, and a twist that will leave you speechless. On this channel, we bring you powerful life stories that inspire, surprise, and prove how a single moment can change everything. Make sure to subscribe and join us for more unforgettable stories. Rain slicked the windshield as William Stone guided his sleek car through the city streets. His mind was already in tomorrow, occupied with board meetings, financial forecasts, and the constant pressure of carrying a family name known in every corner of the city. The steady thrum of the rain was almost hypnotic, and in that haze of distraction, he made a wrong turn. The road narrowed, the streetlights thinned, and the comforting hum of traffic was replaced by silence. Before he could correct himself, shadows spilled from the alleys. A group of men surrounded the car, faces hidden beneath hoods and wet caps. The door was yanked open, the metallic scent of adrenaline hitting his throat. "Out!" one of them barked. He tried reasoning, tried to keep his composure, but it was useless. In minutes, the car was gone, his wallet and phone stripped from him, leaving him stranded in the drizzle with nothing but the clothes on his back. For the first time in years, William felt powerless, not because of money he lacked, but because in this moment, it meant absolutely nothing. He wandered toward the main avenue, shoes splashing through shallow puddles, rainwater dripping from his cuffs. The neon glow of a bus stop appeared ahead, a thin shelter holding a few souls waiting quietly for their way home. William's chest tightened. A bus. It had been years since he had even stepped inside one, but with no taxis in sight, no phone to summon a driver, he had no choice. The bus hissed to a halt, brakes squealing, doors yawning open. William stepped forward, his voice calm but urgent. "I was robbed. They took everything. I just need to get home." His words fell flat against the driver's hardened expression. The man shook his head with practiced dismissal. "No money, no ride. Story I hear every day." The eyes of the passengers turned briefly then away, the way city dwellers do when deciding someone else's problem isn't theirs. William's throat closed, humiliation rising hot against the cold rain still dripping from his hair. He had been to galas, stood on stages, commanded boardrooms, but tonight he was just another man denied entry to warmth because he lacked a few coins. And then she moved. Julia stood from the back of the bus, diner uniform still faintly stained with coffee and grease, exhaustion tugging at her shoulders. Her shift had stretched longer than expected, and all she had wanted was silence on the ride home. Yet when she saw him, disheveled, eyes quietly pleading, something in her refused to stay still. Without a word, she stepped forward, pressed her last coins into the driver's hand, and said, "I'll pay for him." The clink of the metal sounded louder than it should have. William's eyes lifted, meeting hers. No hesitation, no expectation, just simple kindness. "You don't have to," he began. "I already did," she cut in, nodding toward the driver, who sighed and waved him on. "Better get on before he changes his mind." William stepped past her, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. He found a seat near the front, but the weight of her act kept tugging his gaze backward. She sat again by the window, eyes closed now, as if what she'd done required no acknowledgement. To her, it was nothing. To him, it was everything. When the bus slowed at her stop, Julia rose without looking at him, stepping out into the damp night. The doors closed, and the world swallowed her up. William stared through the glass, unsettled by the strange ache of watching her disappear. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she had chosen him out of all the strangers she must have seen, but he knew one thing: he would not forget her. Hours later, in the silence of his penthouse, with the skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, William leaned back on the leather couch. The comfort of wealth felt hollow tonight. His mind replayed the bus again and again, the glint of coins sliding across a driver's palm, the brief light in the eyes of a girl who had nothing to spare but gave anyway. He picked up the house phone, his voice low but firm. "Find the diner," he told his doorman. "The one on that bus line. Blue uniforms. I need to know where she works." Because for the first time in his carefully scripted life, William Stone felt compelled not by duty or profit, but by the memory of a stranger's last coins, and the way they had bought him more than a ride. They had bought him a question that would not let him sleep. The bell above the diner door jingled as Julia wiped the counter, her fingers aching from another long shift. The night before had already blurred into memory. Paying for a stranger's bus fare wasn't the kind of thing she'd expected to linger. She had gone home, fallen into bed, and told herself it didn't matter. People came and went. Kindness wasn't supposed to echo. Yet as she brewed the first pot of coffee that morning, she caught herself thinking of him, the tall man with the unsettled eyes, who had looked out of place on a bus, yet strangely human at the same time. She told herself to forget it. And then, just after the morning rush, he walked in. William paused at the door, the smell of coffee and baked bread wrapping around him. For years he'd walked through glass lobbies and Michelin-starred dining rooms, places designed to impress. But here, in this narrow diner with scuffed linoleum floors and buzzing neon lights, he felt more nervous than he ever had in front of a boardroom. His eyes found her instantly. She was busy arranging a tray of mugs, her ponytail swaying as she moved with practiced precision. He almost turned and left. Almost. When she finally looked up and recognized him, surprise flickered across her face. "You?" she murmured, half under her breath. William gave a faint smile, trying to mask his nerves. "Me. I came to settle my debt." She frowned. "Debt?" "You paid my fare last night," he said softly, leaning on the counter. "I think it's only fair I return the favor." Julia shook her head, laughing quietly. "It was just bus fare. You don't need to." "At least let me buy a coffee," he interrupted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't entitled, wasn't smug. He sounded almost genuine. After a moment, she shrugged and poured him a cup. "If that's how you want to settle your debt, then fine." She slid the cup toward him and went back to work. William lifted the mug, savoring the bitter warmth. He'd drunk coffee on private jets, in five-star suites overlooking Paris, but none of it tasted quite like this. He watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the way she greeted every customer with the same quiet smile, the way she handled 3 orders at once without breaking her rhythm. There was something magnetic in her simplicity, something grounding. When the counter cleared, she leaned her elbows against it, studying him with narrowed eyes. "So what's your story?" William hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that he was William Stone, heir to one of the largest hotel chains in the country, the man people fawned over at galas and chased for deals. But he saw the skepticism in her gaze and, more importantly, the lack of interest in impressing him. For the first time in his life, he wanted to be someone without the weight of a name. "I work in the hotel business," he said carefully, stirring his coffee. Her brows rose slightly. "Hotel business? Sounds important." "Not as glamorous as it seems," he replied. Julia tilted her head, unconvinced, but chose not to press further. Instead, she shifted the conversation. "And what brings you to a place like this?" William smiled faintly. "Maybe I was looking for something real." Her laugh was quick, sharp, but not unkind. "You won't find much glamour here, just cheap coffee and tired waitresses. Maybe that's exactly what I need." For a moment, their eyes met, and Julia felt a strange unease settle in her chest. There was something about this man that didn't fit. His clothes were casual enough, but his posture, the way he spoke, it was practiced, deliberate, like someone who belonged to a different world but was trying not to show it. She pushed the thought aside. It didn't matter who he was. As the lunch crowd trickled in, she moved away to serve a new wave of customers. William sat quietly, watching her work, feeling something he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't like the people he was used to. No hidden motives, no polite facades. She hadn't known his name when she helped him. She hadn't wanted anything in return. That thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. By the time Julia returned, he was already standing. He left enough money on the counter to cover his coffee twice over and offered her a final grateful glance. She met his eyes, unsure what to make of him. Then the bell above the door rang again, and he was gone. But as Julia wiped the counter clean, she caught herself smiling despite the exhaustion dragging at her bones. She didn't know why. She didn't know him. But something told her this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. And outside, William leaned against the hood of a borrowed car, staring at the diner sign glowing faintly against the sky. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about quarterly profits or empire expansions. He was thinking about a girl who had given him a ride home when he had nothing. And he knew with absolute certainty he would be back. The television in the corner of the diner buzzed with its usual chatter. Morning news anchors discussing politics, weather forecasts scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Julia hardly noticed it most days, too busy balancing trays and wiping counters. But that afternoon, just as she was pouring a fresh pot of coffee for a regular, a name caught her attention. William Stone, heir to the Stone Hotel's empire, was seen last night at the exclusive gala celebrating the chain's expansion. Julia froze. The pot nearly slipped from her hands as she turned toward the screen. There he was, William. Not the man who sat quietly at her counter each morning with warm eyes and a half smile, but a polished figure in a tuxedo, stepping into flashing cameras, surrounded by executives. His jawline looked sharper under the spotlight, his expression colder, rehearsed. For a moment, Julia couldn't breathe. Her mind reeled. Hotel business, he had said, but he hadn't mentioned being the William Stone. She remembered the way he downplayed everything, the way he avoided details, the vague way he answered her questions, the unease that had been simmering inside her since she saw him step out of a luxury car the other night now boiled over. He had lied, or worse, he had withheld the truth, letting her believe he was just some ordinary man wandering into her diner for cheap coffee. Why? What game was he playing? Her chest tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. Customers called her name, but their voices sounded muffled, distant. She untied her apron with trembling fingers and muttered something about needing air. The cool wind outside slapped her skin, but it wasn't enough to steady her. She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to find them. The Stone Hotel loomed over downtown like a monument to wealth. Its glass facade caught the setting sun, turning it into a blinding beacon. Julia hesitated at the revolving doors, her diner uniform starkly out of place among the tailored suits and polished shoes entering and exiting. But she squared her shoulders and stepped inside. The lobby was cavernous, marble floors gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers. Every sound seemed amplified, the echo of heels clicking, the murmur of well-dressed guests. Julia felt eyes on her, but she didn't stop. She walked straight to the front desk, her voice sharper than she intended. "I need to see William Stone." The receptionist blinked, momentarily thrown off by the request. "Mr. Stone is busy. Tell him Julia is here," she cut in, her tone leaving no room for argument. The woman hesitated, then picked up the phone. Minutes later, Julia's heart nearly gave out as she saw him descend the grand staircase. He wasn't in jeans and a casual shirt now, he was in a tailored suit, every inch the man from the television. Yet when his eyes landed on her, something unguarded flickered across his face. "Julia," he said, striding toward her, "what are you doing here?" Her arms crossed tightly against her chest, nails digging into her skin. "I should be asking you that." Confusion knitted his brow. "What do you mean?" "I saw you on TV," she snapped. "Stone Hotels, heir to an empire, and all this time you've been sitting in my diner pretending to be someone else." His jaw clenched. He glanced around the lobby where curious guests were beginning to watch. "Not here," he murmured, his voice low. "Why not?" Julia's voice trembled, but she refused to back down. "You told me you wanted something real. Was that a lie too?" Silence stretched between them. For a moment, William looked as if he might deflect again, but then his shoulders sagged. He leaned closer, his words barely audible. "I didn't want you to see this first. I wanted you to know me before the name, before the money. I didn't lie, Julia. I just didn't tell you everything." Her throat tightened, betrayal battling with the memory of the man who had sat at her counter each morning. "You don't get to decide how much of the truth I deserve." She turned on her heel, walking quickly toward the exit. William reached out instinctively, but let his hand fall before it touched her. He watched helplessly as she pushed through the revolving doors, disappearing into the evening. For the first time in years, William Stone felt a panic he couldn't control. He had handled hostile investors, cutthroat negotiations, family expectations that weighed like chains. But this was different. This was raw. And as the lobby swallowed him whole, he realized he had just lost the only person who had ever looked at him without seeing dollar signs. That night, the city lights glittered through his penthouse windows, but William sat in the dark, his head in his hands. The silence pressed down on him until finally, he whispered to no one, "I can't lose her." The next morning, while the papers announced his inevitable rise to company president, William stood in the boardroom and stunned every executive present. His voice was calm but resolute. "I'm stepping down. I won't take the presidency. I'm leaving Stone Hotels." The room erupted in disbelief, but William felt only clarity, because for the first time he wasn't choosing what was expected of him, and he was choosing what was real. The cafe near the park was nearly empty when Julia slipped inside, clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't slept much since the confrontation at the hotel. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw William in that tuxedo, sharp, untouchable, a stranger. Yet another image wouldn't leave her either, the man sitting at her counter every morning, laughing softly when she teased him, sipping coffee as though it tasted like the only thing that mattered. Two versions of the same man warred in her head, and she hated that she couldn't decide which was real. She hadn't planned to meet him, but his message had been simple. Please. One chance to explain. Against her better judgment, she'd agreed. Now she waited, her fingers drumming against the table, heart pounding faster with every second that passed. When William walked through the door, he looked different, not like the confident heir she'd seen on television, but not like the casual stranger at her counter either. He looked stripped back. There was tension in his shoulders, but also a lightness in his eyes, as though he'd finally stopped pretending. He slid into the seat across from her, placing his hands flat on the table. "I left," he said without preamble. Julia frowned. "Left what?" "The company. My father wanted me to take over as president. I told him no. I walked away." Her breath caught. You walked away from Stone Hotels?" He nodded. "It was never my choice. It was a script written for me before I was even old enough to read it, and for the first time, I tore up the script." Julia studied him carefully, searching for the lie, but all she saw was exhaustion edged with something fiercer, resolve. "And what does that have to do with me?" William leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "Everything, because you reminded me what real looks like. The night you gave your last coins to a stranger, you gave me something I'd forgotten existed, kindness without agenda. I don't want to build a life where I'm nothing but a last name. I want to build something that matters, and I want you to be part of it." Julia's chest tightened. "William?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found a photograph. He turned the screen toward her. A weathered coastal mansion stood against the horizon, its paint chipped, windows clouded, but its bones proud and unbroken. The sea stretched beyond it, wild and glittering. "This place," he said softly. "It's been abandoned for years. My family saw no profit in it, so they left it to rot. But I see possibility. A hotel, yes, but not like the ones my family builds. Small, personal, a place that feels alive. And at the heart of it..." He hesitated, watching her face carefully. "A bakery. Yours." Julia's lips parted, but no words came. She stared at the photo, at the dream she'd carried quietly for years, suddenly placed before her, but suspicion flared, tangled with longing. "Why would you offer me this? You don't even know me." William's gaze held hers, unflinching. "I know enough. I know you've worked every day for a future that keeps slipping away. I know you're the kind of person who gives when you have nothing to spare. I know you're not afraid of hard work. That's more than I can say for half the people I grew up around. And I know one more thing. When you talk about opening a bakery, your eyes light up in a way I've never seen in the circles I come from. That's what I want. Real light, real meaning." The silence between them throbbed, broken only by the clink of cutlery from the barista in the back. Julia forced herself to look away, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to believe him, to believe in this chance. But another part whispered warnings. What if this was another game? What if stepping into his world meant losing herself? She rose slowly from her chair, her hands trembling. "I can't decide this now." "I don't need your answer today," William said quickly, standing too. "But I want you to know I'm serious. I walked away from everything because I'd rather build one small, imperfect dream with you than inherit a flawless empire without you." Julia's throat ached. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity, wanted to cry at the sincerity. She turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to glance back. "If you're lying to me, William, if this is just another script you're playing out..." "It's not," he said firmly, his voice echoing in the quiet cafe. "This time, it's real." She left without another word, the cool night air rushing against her skin, but his words followed her like footsteps she couldn't escape. That night, as she sat at the small kitchen table with her mother, Julia tried to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. Her mother listened quietly, then said simply, "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't knowing the truth, it's deciding whether you're brave enough to believe it." Julia lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. The photo of the seaside mansion burned into her mind. For the first time, her dream felt close enough to touch, but reaching for it meant stepping into a storm she couldn't yet see the end of. And across the city, William stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the ocean breeze still lingering in his thoughts. He had chosen his path. Now all that remained was whether Julia would choose to walk it with him. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air as the old coastal mansion came back to life. Once forgotten, its cracked walls and rotting beams were being stripped and reinforced, its ghostly halls echoing with workers' voices instead of silence. Julia stood on the front steps, flour still dusting her sleeves from that morning's experiments in the temporary kitchen she'd set up. She was exhausted, but her chest swelled with a mix of fear and pride. This was her bakery, her chance, her dream unfolding in real time. William emerged from inside, a rolled blueprint in his hands. He looked different now, not the stiff air from the gala, nor the mysterious man sipping coffee at her counter. Sweat stained his shirt, his sleeves were rolled up, and he looked like someone who had chosen to dig in, not just oversee from afar. He walked toward her, holding out the paper. "They say the foundation needs more work than expected," he said, his voice tight. "It's going to cost twice what we planned, and it'll push the opening back at least 6 months." Julia's heart dropped. "Twice?" "Yes." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We could make cuts, simplify the bakery design, reduce the number of rooms in the hotel, but that's not what we promised each other." She looked at him, her stomach twisting. For a moment, doubt crept in. This was the kind of obstacle that crushed ordinary dreams, the kind she'd seen in her neighborhood too many times. People reached too high, life pushed back, and dreams broke before they ever touched reality. But then she remembered the way she'd always promised herself she wouldn't give up. She folded her arms and shook her head. "No cuts. We wait. We do it right, even if it takes longer." William stared at her, something softening in his expression. "That's what I admire most about you," he murmured. "Patience?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Conviction," he corrected. "You don't settle." For a moment, the wind from the sea wrapped around them, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. But neither noticed the shadow that lingered just beyond the construction site. A sleek car parked down the road, its tinted window cracked just enough for someone to watch. Inside sat Eric, Julia's ex, his lips curled into a smirk as he leaned back against the leather seat. He had heard the rumors of Julia's big project and had come to see for himself. And now that he wasn't about to stay away. That evening, Julia's phone buzzed while she kneaded dough for a test batch. She wiped her hands and glanced at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but something in her gut tightened. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Julia," the voice purred. Her breath caught. "Eric." "What do you want?" she asked sharply, her knuckles whitening around the counter edge. "I heard you're playing businesswoman now. A bakery in some fancy hotel? Cute. But we both know you don't have what it takes to make it last." Julia's jaw clenched. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore." "I'll talk how I want," he sneered. "Don't forget, I know you. You'll crash, and when you do, I'll be right here to remind you I was right." She hung up, her hands shaking, but the words burned in her chest long after the call ended. She tried to hide it, but William noticed the tension when he came in later that night. "Who called you?" he asked quietly. "No one important." But he didn't believe her. The next day, while she busied herself with recipes, William began digging. He had contacts, resources, ways of finding answers she didn't. And when he discovered who Eric was, the man who had mocked her dreams, the one who had tried to shrink her until she fit his narrow world, William's blood ran hot. He wasn't just going to protect Julia, he was going to make sure no one ever dimmed her again. Yet William had his own battles. His father had heard of the project and summoned him to a private meeting in the city. The elder Stone's voice was sharp as a blade. "You're wasting your life on this toy hotel. Come back to the company before you ruin yourself. Do you think this little waitress makes you a man? She's dragging you down." William's fists clenched under the table. He thought of Julia's steady eyes, her refusal to settle, the way she carried her mother and herself through storms most people couldn't. Imagine, dragging him down? She was the only reason he had ever stood tall. He rose from his seat, his father's voice still echoing, and said simply, "I've already chosen." Back at the coast, Julia was fighting her own war. Whispers spread through town, people doubting whether the hotel would ever open, some even mocking the idea of a millionaire and a diner girl building something together. Each rumor cut deeper, but Julia kept her head high, pouring herself into recipes, testing cakes and breads until the small kitchen was heavy with the scent of her determination. The tension built, threads pulling tighter from every side. A father determined to pull his son back into the empire, an ex hell-bent on poisoning her resolve, a town doubting what they hadn't yet seen. But in the middle of it all, Julia and William clung to each other, even as the world seemed determined to break them apart. One night, after a brutal day of setbacks, William found Julia sitting on the unfinished bakery floor, flour on her cheek and tears she refused to wipe away. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Do you think we're going to make it?" William looked at her, his voice steady despite the storm around them. "We already have. The rest is just proving it to everyone else." Julia leaned into him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. And outside, the waves crashed harder against the shore, as if the ocean itself was testing whether their foundation would hold. The coastal town was buzzing with a strange electricity on the day of the hotel's unveiling. For months, locals had whispered that the project was doomed, that the young millionaire who walked away from an empire and the diner girl with flour on her hands had bitten off more than they could chew. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few almost gleeful at the thought of watching them fail. But as noon approached, crowds gathered outside the newly restored mansion-turned-hotel. Its windows gleamed in the sunlight, the stonework polished, the wooden doors reborn with new strength. It stood as if it had never been abandoned, as if it had waited years for this very moment. Inside the bakery, Julia paced the floor, wiping already spotless counters. Her chest tightened with every sound from outside. The footsteps of guests arriving, the low murmur of reporters waiting to pounce on their story. She had baked through the night, every tray of bread and pastries an anchor against her fear. She told herself she wasn't afraid of failure. She had lived through worse. But this? This was her dream exposed to the world, vulnerable and raw. William entered quietly, dressed not in a suit of his father's choosing, but in a tailored jacket that still carried the salt of the sea air. He looked lighter, freer, yet there was gravity in his eyes. He crossed the room and took her hands. "They're waiting," he said softly. Julia swallowed hard. What if they hate it? What if no one comes back tomorrow? He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Then we keep baking and we keep building. We didn't come this far to let fear stop us now. The bakery doors opened at noon, and the first wave of guests stepped inside. The air filled with the scent of fresh bread, lemon pie, and dark coffee. Customers leaned over glass cases, marveling at the pastries, while servers rushed to fill orders. At the hotel's reception, guests checked in, their voices carrying delight at the elegant yet welcoming rooms. Laughter began to replace whispers. Skepticism dissolved into awe. Reporters scribbled furiously, snapping photos of Julia moving through the bakery with ease, her apron dusted with flour, her smile genuine as she served a child her first taste of chocolate cake. And always, William was nearby, guiding guests through the halls, ensuring every detail was perfect. For a moment, it seemed as though the storm had passed, but storms don't die so easily. Late that afternoon, as the crowd swelled, William stepped onto the hotel's outdoor terrace where a podium had been set up. Julia watched from the bakery doorway, her heart pounding as he faced the sea of cameras and townspeople. She knew he had planned to speak, but he hadn't told her what he intended to say. Most of you know me as William Stone, he began, his voice steady, carrying over the restless audience. Heir to a hotel empire, a man who walked away from everything expected of him. What you don't know is why. He paused, letting silence stretch. Months ago, I was stranded, robbed of my car, my phone, my wallet. I had nothing. And a stranger, a girl who had just finished a double shift, gave her last coins to pay for my bus fare. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for anything in return. She gave because it was right. That night changed me. The crowd shifted, the hum of curiosity sharpening. Julia's cheeks flushed as heads turned in her direction. William's gaze sought her, steady and unshakable. I realize that wealth means nothing if it doesn't touch lives beyond your own. So today, I'm not just opening a hotel, I'm beginning something bigger. This property, this dream, it doesn't belong to me alone. As of this morning, I've transferred majority ownership of this hotel to the woman who inspired it. Julia. Gasps rippled through the terrace. Reporters shouted, flashes erupted. Julia froze, her hands trembling, the ground tilting beneath her. William had just given her more than she had ever imagined. Control, recognition, trust, but he wasn't finished. And this is just the beginning, he continued, his voice rising. We're launching the Fare Forward Fund. Every bus line in this city will have free peak hour rides, so no one is denied the chance to get where they need to be. No more last coins for a stranger, no more choosing between food and a fare. We will expand it, city by city, as far as it can go. Because that small act of kindness showed me the truth. The smallest gestures carry the power to change everything. The crowd erupted, applause crashing like waves against the terrace. Julia pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes stinging with tears. He had turned their story into something bigger, something that would outlive them both. William turned back toward her then, the world watching, but his voice softened as if speaking only to her. He stepped down from the podium, crossed the terrace, and before she could comprehend what was happening, he knelt in front of her. Time stilled. The ocean breeze hushed. The cameras fell quiet. Even the murmurs of the crowd faded. Julia, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. His hand shook, not with doubt, but with the weight of everything they had endured. From the moment you gave me your last coins, you gave me far more than a bus ride. You gave me a reason to believe in something real. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. I want to spend every day proving that faith right. Will you marry me? Julia's vision blurred with tears. The world, the doubts, the struggles, all of it melted away as she whispered, yes. The crowd exploded into applause. Reporters cheered. Townspeople clapped. Strangers hurried to bishu. hugged each other. William rose, slipping the ring onto her trembling hand before pulling her into a kiss that silenced every doubt and sealed every promise. Above them, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The hotel and bakery stood gleaming behind them, not just as a business, but as a monument to a truth stronger than wealth or legacy, that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could rewrite the story of a lifetime. And as Julia leaned against him, her ring glinting in the fading light, she knew this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning.